If you have not yet read Bill McKibben's new book, Here Comes the Sun, I highly recommend it, because for the first time since we had Earth Day in 1970, we actually have the solution in sight, and that is low-cost solar energy and battery storage. So anyway, I retired in December, and it's interesting how the industry has changed, because a lot of people, for about 5 years prior to my retirement, said, "Hey, Mike, when did you retire?" And I would say, my key card still lets me into the TV station, so I think I'm supposed to work on Monday. And then they would say, "Oh, we don't watch local news anymore." And I hear that so often that it wasn't that hard to retire, because a lot of people thought I had retired or passed away years earlier. And so let's get started. What I'd like to do is I'm going to run through this, and we'll have time for some questions on the back side. Okay, we're going to start out with a little perspective.
Well, as we've told you, this is Mike Nelson's final show, and after a week of beautiful tributes, this will be the final one.
So a couple weeks ago, Mike and I sat down at Studio B, that's just right next door, to talk about his remarkable career. So I've known Mike a long time, but sitting down with him in a formal interview, it really hit me. This guy's a legend. A storm can change history, and a severe thunderstorm in southern Wisconsin in 1964 certainly did.
I remember when I was 6 or 7 years old, we had this big thunderstorm come through my hometown of Madison, Wisconsin. Tornado watches, warnings, flash flooding, trees down. Most people were all freaked out. I thought it was great.
That storm blew in a lifelong love affair with the weather. The awe, the wonder, the science behind it. He still has the first weather station he built when he was 10.
I have the old thermometer in there. I made this out of just scrap wood. Each day I'd write down the pressure and the weather and if it snowed or not.
When you're a kid who loves weather like that, the local TV weather forecaster becomes like a superhero. And for young Mike growing up in Madison, Wisconsin, that superhero was Terry Kelly, the chief meteorologist for ABC affiliate WKOW-TV. Mike watched him every night and dreamed of forecasting the weather on TV himself one day. He even made his own weather map.
I would take it out of the newspaper where the fronts were, and I'd put the lows and highs on there, and then in front of a mirror I'd practice doing the weather.
Fast forward to a teenage Mike Nelson, still dreaming of working in TV news, but paying the bills working at Baskin-Robbins, when the Terry Kelly walks in and becomes a regular customer.
He came into my ice cream store. For me, this is like a football star.
After a year or so of serving his idol ice cream, Mike worked up the nerve to ask Mr. Kelly if he could work for him at the TV station. Answer phones, empty trash, anything. Kelly said yes.
That next Friday, November 4th, 1976, I got hired at minimum wage to work at the TV station, and Cindy and I went on our first date.
That's a good day.
Yeah.
Cindy is his now wife of 43 years. In the 1970s, your local TV weatherman, and they were almost exclusively men, still used magnets and markers to make weather maps. Well, Mike's mentor, Terry Kelly, helped develop the first computer that created weather graphics for television. And still working for Kelly, Mike spent 1979 through 1984 installing these new computer systems at TV stations across the country and training weather teams to use them.
I actually trained Al Roker on the first weather computer he ever had.
That job also brought Mike to Denver in the early 80s to train legendary Colorado forecasters Stormy Rotman and Bill Custer on the first weather computer in Denver. Mike eventually pivoted to become a full-time on-air meteorologist working in Madison and then St. Louis. He arrived in Denver in 1991 for a job at KUSA, then finally made his way to KMGH Denver7 in 2004. And the rest, as they say, is history.
Nice evening out there with clear skies.
Mike considers education to be a big part of his job, educating about weather, science, climate change. And if you grew up in the Denver metro area and are of a certain age, chances are pretty good that Mike spoke to your elementary school. He probably juggled hailstones, showed how weather balloons work, and most definitely performed his signature showstopper, the tornado dance.
I act out the two different air masses getting into the big fight. This is the cool air, we're in the shades, and then the hot air, of course, is kind of floating around like this, and they get into this big shoving match, and the big thunderstorms build, and the jet stream comes in, and the whole thing starts spinning big and slow, and then smaller and faster and faster and smaller, and that's how the tornado forms. I've worked hard and done a lot of school talks. I think I've talked to 1 million children.
Some of his other resume highlights include winning 20 Emmy Awards and being inducted into the Denver Press Club Hall of Fame. His proudest professional achievement?
Probably becoming a fellow of the American Meteorological Society, because there's only about 30 broadcasters. Yeah, that's the little thing right there. Right there. There's only about 30 broadcasters that have ever been named fellow in the AMS, and it's only 1% of the society is ever elevated to fellow.
That may be the award he's most proud of, but if you know Mike, you know nothing in his work life is more important than the viewers.
I think the thing that I really have always been flattered about and don't take lightly is the fact that despite all the changes in this industry, and there have been a lot of them, and it continues to go on, it still boils down to people watch people. And we are invited into people's homes every single night.
So, after 48 years of being invited into people's homes, and now phones, 48 years of getting you ready for that next blizzard, 48 years of tornado dances, what's next? Mike says he and Cindy will stay in Denver for now, and that he will still be watching storms, only now from the comfort of his home.
I will keep doing all the forecasting for myself and watching and waiting for the next round of big thunderstorms or heavy snow, because I so enjoy watching our weather.
What do you think the 6-year-old Mike Nelson would have thought if he would have seen the successes you have had and where you ended up in this business?
Pretty good for a freckle-faced, red-headed kid.
A storm can change history. And lucky for all of us, there was a severe thunderstorm in southern Wisconsin in 1964.
When you can figure out at the age of 6 what you want to be and still like doing it 60 years later, that's pretty cool. So that was, thank you. So that's a little perspective on me, and here's a little perspective on the Earth. The Earth is 4.6 billion years old. I'm slightly younger than that. Let's scale that to 46 years. 8 months ago, the dinosaurs lived. Human beings have only been here for 4 hours, and the Industrial Revolution began 1 minute ago. And in that minute, the carbon dioxide concentration has gone from 280 parts per million to over 425 parts per million. It's not that climate hasn't always changed. It's the rate of the change that we're seeing now that is unprecedented. And that CO2, very simply, is trapping heat or redirecting heat that would otherwise escape into outer space. Here's a little way how we know this works.
I'm Scott Denning, and I'm a professor of atmospheric science at Colorado State University. Today, we're going to talk about the greenhouse effect, how it works, and why it's important for climate change. All of the energy that comes into the Earth has to get to the Earth by electromagnetic radiation. There's no air outside the Earth's atmosphere, so there's no way for heat to get in and out of the Earth. It's just a big ball floating around in a vacuum. So the only way we can get energy in and energy back out is through electromagnetic radiation. It's actually waves of energy. And short waves are visible to us as light, and we can feel the sun on us. That's the short waves. And the long waves go back out. The long waves carry the energy back out to space, radiating energy. Just like you feel energy coming off a fire, or you feel energy coming off a heat lamp, or you can feel heat energy coming off of a hot stove, the Earth is radiating energy back out to space, cooling itself off all the time. The energy that comes in from the sun is not enough to keep us warm here at the surface of the Earth. If that was the only energy we had, believe it or not, the whole Earth would actually be so cold that all of the oceans would freeze solid. The Earth would be just this white ball of ice floating in space. It'd be really cold. We wouldn't even be here talking about it because it wouldn't be a habitable planet. It's really lucky for us that we have air. It actually turns out about 2/3 of the energy that warms us up at the surface of the Earth is from the warm air that also radiates these waves. It all came from the sun originally, but some of it gets recycled. It goes up, it gets caught by these little greenhouse molecules and sent back down. We call this the greenhouse effect. The energy comes in from the sun, it goes back out to space, but some of that energy gets trapped by the warm air and re-radiated back down, like a bunch of little heat lamps up in the sky. Now, you may have heard that the greenhouse gas that we hear about a lot is CO2, carbon dioxide. That's actually just a small amount of the air. 99% of our air is not carbon dioxide, it's nitrogen and oxygen, N2 and O2. But N2 and O2 are not very good at absorbing energy. They're both made of two atoms of the same element. So N2, two N's, glued together with a bond between them. Think of them like tennis balls on a spring or tennis balls on a stick. These waves of energy can come up and hit that ball on a stick molecule and start it vibrating. And the energy is actually then stored in the molecule. So the energy comes up from the Earth, hits the molecule, and it starts vibrating like woo, 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 woo. But then it can unvibrate or de-excite and send that energy back out to the Earth. It could go woo, 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 woo. And then as it's vibrating slower, that energy comes back out. But there's not a heck of a lot you can do with two balls on a stick. There's just not that many ways for them to move. CO2 is different. CO2 has three atoms. So there's a CO2. And as you can imagine, the CO2 molecule can vibrate just like N2 or O2. It can go woo, 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 woo. But it can also do other stuff. For example, because it's got three atoms, it can go woo, 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 or it can go bee, boo, bee, boo, or it can go bee, boo, bee, boo. And all these different kinds of molecular dances that the CO2 molecule can do will absorb different wavelengths of energy. So because it has all these different varieties of dances, or varieties of vibration that it can do up in the sky, it can absorb much more energy and re-radiate it like heat lamps back to the Earth, keeping us warm. So the CO2 is a much more powerful greenhouse gas than O2 and N2 that make up most of our air. Water vapor is another one. Water vapor is H2O. So again, there's three atoms in an H2O. Let's see, this can be the O this time, and here's a couple of H's. But unlike CO2, they're not all in a straight line like this. They're actually bent like this. So the H2O molecule is even better at dancing and vibrating than the CO2 molecule because it can go wee woo wee woo like that, but it can also go beep boop beep boop, or it can do this swinging thing. It can even do handsprings. I'm not going to try that here. That would be kind of dangerous. So what does all this have to do with climate change? As you know, when we burn stuff that's made of carbon, like coal, oil, and gas, we react it with oxygen in the atmosphere to make extra CO2 molecules. Each one of those little extra CO2 molecules captures that long wave energy going up, does its little molecular dance, sends it back down. So it's like extra little heat lamps up in the sky that send energy to the surface of the Earth. We've calculated that if you double the number of CO2 molecules in the air, it's the equal amount of energy to putting a little kid's 4-watt nightlight in every square meter of the planet. So that's not a lot, these little 4-watt nightlights, but if you put one every square meter on the whole planet, you'd expect that to warm things up. When we say we expect extra CO2 in the atmosphere to warm the surface of the Earth, we're saying adding energy to something changes its temperature. You know, we could argue about how much it'll change or when it's going to change, but the idea that putting extra CO2 in the air will warm the surface is pretty much of a no-brainer. You add energy to something, it changes its temperature. I'm Scott Denning from Colorado State University, talking to you today for Changing Climates.
No, I did not teach Dr. Denning his dance. So I have the tornado dance and he has the carbon dioxide dance. But I will tell you, Scott has retired up at CSU, but he was one of the most brilliant people I ever learned climate science from, and a lecture from Scott Denning is really something to behold. And so I asked him about methane.
So methane, I'm glad you asked, Mike, is CH4, right? So it's CH1, 2, 3, 4. Just imagine all the ways that you can do that. So I showed that methane dance, and remember, oh yeah, so methane, much better absorbing
Very good stuff. So people have said to me for years, Mike, you can't even predict next week, let alone next century. How can I believe anything you say about the climate and what's going to occur years and decades from now? Well, an analogy that I like to use is that weather is like one play in a football game, and climate is the history of the National Football League. On any given Sunday, the worst team in the league can beat the best team, but over the course of time, the best team is going to win the championships. If it's snowing in Las Vegas, well, it's winter time, and we expect more unusual weather events as the climate system gets more energy. Global warming creates a steroid effect. I took this picture of me just earlier before coming up here, and it's that steroid effect that is juicing the atmosphere. It makes hurricanes intensify faster, heat waves hotter, floods floodier, droughts droughtier, and that's the key. And it galls me when these so-called experts get on a certain network and say, this is way too complicated for us to possibly understand, because the global heat balance is even easier. It's like the basic rules of the game. A touchdown is 6 points, a field goal is 3, the field is 100 yards long. It's heat in versus heat out. There's nothing more complicated than that. And if you have more heat coming in than going out, the planet gets warmer. Add heat, get warmer, end of story. So we're in uncharted territory right now. And if you look at the CO2 levels measured in the last 800,000 years, we're now on the plus side of 422 parts per million. When I was born in 1957, we were at 315. And if you'd like to know your carbon birthday, just take a picture of that website and you can find the year that you were born and see what the CO2 levels were at that time. And that CO2 is going to stay there for a long time. It has a life expectancy of centuries in the atmosphere. As a matter of fact, the carbon dioxide emitted from the first Model T car is still in the atmosphere, trapping or redirecting heat and causing the atmosphere to warm. And a lot of that warming is baked in. We're not going to fix that anytime soon, but lowering our carbon emissions can have a dramatic impact on future warming. And that's the key to what we're talking about tonight. And let's put away the myth of sequestration. Carbon sequestration is very expensive and it requires a lot of energy. You would need a power plant 1/3 bigger in order to sequester the emissions. And the technology has not proven scalable. Globally, we had 100 million tons of CO2 every single day. Right now, in Iceland, the best place to do any carbon sequestration, it's at about $1,000 a ton to put that back in the ground. That means, on a daily basis, it would cost $100 billion a day, not to lower the CO2, but just to take care of the emissions we put up there every single day. Which means it would be nearly $37 trillion a year globally to put that carbon back in the ground. That is 1/3 of the world gross product. So if you really want to know the cost of carbon, it's right there, $37 trillion a year. The upshot is it's very hard to put the genie back in the bottle. The best solution as far as carbon sequestration is to stop burning fossil fuel. The Stone Age did not end for the lack of stone, and the oil age will end long before the world runs out of oil, Sheikh Yamani. And Nearly 100 years ago, Thomas Edison said, "I'd put my money on the sun and solar energy. What a source of power. I hope we don't have to wait until oil and coal run out before we tackle that." Now, fossil fuel has certainly been a miracle. Life without fossil fuel was cold, dark, and short. Concentrated energy from the sun stored in the earth for hundreds of millions of years, essentially the first battery storage. And it's the energy density that makes it so useful for gasoline and jet fuel and gas, natural gas and oil and coal for electric power plants. But burning it is really not very efficient. Nearly 60% of the energy is wasted when we burn it to create electricity. And there's going to be a huge increase in the need for electricity. We hear about this every single day. And it's not just electric cars and trucks. It is crypto and AI and data centers. Estimates are it could be as much as 100 gigawatts in the next 5 years. 1 gigawatt, to visualize it, is the equivalent of a big nuclear reactor. Waiting until the early 2030s will be too late for us to generate the electricity that we're going to need. So this is the growing energy gap. I remember as a kid hearing about the missile gap. This is the energy gap. The first solar cell was invented at Bell Labs in New Jersey in 1954. And the United States led the world in the development of solar energy until 2000. Thank you very much to NREL. China began their quest to dominate development of low-cost solar technology about 25 years ago. And now they have a virtual monopoly on solar panels and is the leader in the world in electric vehicles. I'm sure many of you have heard of CATL and BYD. If not, look them up. China is also building vast amounts of high-voltage transmission equaling low-cost energy. They are racing to be the first electro-state. And the nation that electrifies their economy first will be the most powerful in the next 25 years. And we are losing that race and running out of time. Look at these numbers right here. Just in the first half of 2025, we added globally 380 gigawatts of solar energy. China did 256 gigawatts through June. That is 256 nuclear reactors installed in 6 months in China. I don't disagree with this. We need to be energy dominant and we need energy from all sources. So let's talk about those sources. We need electric power from all different sources. More options means lower cost for consumers. We need to protect our power grid from terrorism and severe weather. We need to modernize the grid and provide the power needed for the future. But we are currently falling far behind China in developing dependable, low-cost energy and a modern transmission system. And once again, the nation or nations that win the race will dominate for the rest of this century. So let's talk about some of the different sources. Gas turbines, basically a jet engine on the ground, not lifting an airplane, but spinning a turbine, spinning a generator to produce electricity. The compressor draws the air in. The combustion system lights that air, or lights fuel and heats that air greatly. The turbine then spins and produces electricity. And that gas turbine, they say, has efficiencies generally between 20 and 35%. We may get that to 60, and if we really were able to capture the heat for industrial uses, perhaps efficiencies near 80%. The advantages, they can be brought online quickly when needed. There is a relatively small footprint for the facility. They are much cleaner than burning coal, and they are currently very much in favor by our current Department of Energy. The disadvantages, there is a large backlog for these engines. We're talking the early 2030s. They're complex machines needing exotic metals and engineering. They are cleaner than coal, but they still produce carbon dioxide and other gas emissions, and decarbonizing that gas, aka hydrogen, is still likely years from happening. It can happen, but it's not going to happen anytime soon. So, in this case, these are articles that have just come out. This was September 5th, utility dive. Gas turbine manufacturers expand capacity, but order backlog could prove stubborn, stretching as long as 7 years. How about enhanced geothermal? Also something that our good friends at NREL have done research on. And there are 2 projects in Utah, Forge and Fervo, using techniques that are familiar from fracking. Instead of for petroleum, you frack the rocks to make hot water more efficient. Geothermal is always available. You heat the water up to about 440 degrees, and then you can make high-pressure steam to spin a turbine. And estimates are in the West as much as 90 gigawatts of energy, enough for 65 million homes. Advantages: geothermal always available. There are no carbon emissions. Skilled workers are available from the petro industry. Good resources in the West, and also favored by the current Department of Energy. Disadvantages: the fracking, chemical concerns. Water availability in the West. There are very few resources in the East. The technology must be scaled up, and we have to improve transmission to get that electricity from source to need. Battery storage. I'm very excited about battery storage. Lithium iron phosphate batteries made in Michigan and perfect for energy storage. TerraGen is a facility that my wife and I and some of our friends have visited. It is out near Edwards Air Force Base, and it's a joint project with the DOD. I'm not going to change that. And they can provide up to 4 hours of power. It's interesting when you go out there, because some friends of ours have a drone that they fly up above the solar fields. And when you're out at the one by Edwards Air Force Base and you're flying the drone, very quickly there is somebody that comes out in a Jeep with a .55 caliber machine gun on the back saying, "What the hell are you doing out here?" It's like, we're good. We got our pictures. We're leaving. Nearby that, just off Highway 14 north of Lancaster in California, is Hydrostore. And this is going to start construction later this year. It is using compressed air storage. So they'll dig a big cavern underground and force air underground during sunny times, and then use that compressed air to spin turbines, and that may give us up to several days worth of electricity. And we can replicate a program like Hydrostore in many areas across the country. And then there's Form, which is a battery that uses rust, the oxidation cycle, to produce its electricity. And it's heavy because it's got iron in it, but it's not moving. You don't put it in a car. And it's perfect because it can store energy, they say on their website from Form, up to nearly 100 hours of storage. And iron and air are certainly not rare. The advantages for battery storage: available immediately, great for grid stability, supports the overall grid stability. The technology is improving greatly. We can deploy it anywhere, and it also is favored by the Department of Energy. The disadvantages: the lithium ions currently are available for about 4 hours of storage. The new technologies need to scale up. There are some supply chain concerns, and battery fires are certainly a concern, and of course the transmission needs to improve. And then there's renewables and nuclear. There's no carbon emissions. The nuclear energy provides base load. Renewables need no fuel. New technologies are coming, and at least nukes are favored by the DOE. The disadvantages: nuclear energy is very expensive. There's little domestic uranium mining. Much of the supply comes from Russia. Who wants to live near a nuke? Now, I've had some people say, "Hey, our sailors have been sleeping next to a nuclear reactor for 70 years. And I responded and said, "Well, if you're on that submarine," which my nephew is, and says, "Sir, I don't want to sleep next to the nuke tonight," do you think that sailor really has a choice? I mean, what, are you going to sleep up on the deck of the submarine? Nobody wants to live near a nuke, and there are concerns about waste and safety. Renewables are intermittent, they say, and current administration certainly not a fan. So let's talk about a combination of renewable and nuclear power. Renewable power is reliable enough on a large enough scale because it is always sunny or windy somewhere. Talk about the small modular nuclear reactors. Oklo is one of those startups, a fission reactor with gas turbine backup. But again, you have delays on the gas turbines. Currently, there are no SMRs that are available, and you still have nuclear waste and security issues. Then there's nuclear fusion, the power of the stars. Very expensive, but limitless power. But as we all know in this room, the joke is, hey, fusion is just 25 years away. I know it was in 2020. It still is in 2025. We'll see where we go with that. But what I like to say is, no, that's not true at all. Because actually, fusion is just 8 minutes away. Big, quiet, safe, reliable for the next 5 billion years. And an area the size of the Texas Panhandle could supply all the solar energy needed to power everything in the United States. All the cars, all the trucks, all the data centers, all of our energy, not today, but in the year 2050. Now, I don't advocate paving the Texas Panhandle over in solar panels, because I have friends in Amarillo. But, and if it was cloudy in Amarillo for a week, that might be a problem. We want distributed energy. So let's take a look at this on a world basis. This is a map of the surface area required to power the world in 2050, all those little squares. And my friends, the area circled in the Saharan desert, 1/20th of the Sahara, could power everything for North Africa and Europe. So we are talking about not paving the entire planet in solar panels. It is a small footprint. And utility scale solar, unlike nuclear energy, can be built very, very quickly. Witness this video.
Billions of solar panels to meet the growing demand for clean energy. AES is making scale like that a reality. Introducing Maximo, our new AI-enabled solar robot. Max is delivering cost-effective clean energy to our customers on accelerated timelines. What was once strenuous is now faster, safer, smarter. Max's powerful features supercharge solar construction teams to make this possible. High-speed robotic arms do the heavy lifting and precise installation, while intelligent sensing technology keeps crews protected. Computer vision powered by generative AI delivers exact panel placement. And a mobile microgrid gives Max the endurance to run carbon-free for extended shifts. At the heart of Max, an advanced GPU empowers it to learn and adapt while meticulously tracking construction progress. Solar energy is changing the world. Maximo is changing the world of solar.
That's happening right now. That is an 8,300-acre solar project called Bellefield that is being built right near the Mojave Spaceport in California. And Maximo is running 24/7 along with its colleagues, essentially Mars rovers, putting in solar panels to build this. We were just out there a few months ago, and a year ago it was just flat desert land, and now this thing is half built. It is going to power an Amazon distribution center and data center. And my friends, we can build gigawatts worth of solar energy, not in 12 to 18 years, but in 12 to 18 months. The biggest time constraint is acquiring the land to build the solar field. The actual construction is done in a little over a year. And this is what they look like. This is what we shot with our drone before we got chased out of there with the machine gun on the back of the Jeep. Solar costs have tumbled. And now the cost of utility scale solar has dropped from $350 per megawatt hour back in 2009 to $60 per megawatt hour today. In the 2030s, the cost for solar and wind will likely drop to around $20 per megawatt hour. At the same time, in the 2030s, the cost of nukes is still going to be $100 to $150 per megawatt hour. So my friends, I'm a complete proponent for all forms of energy. But if you're buying nuclear power, it's like buying your electricity from Whole Foods. Perfectly fine, just a little pricey. But solar power is like getting your electricity at Costco. Plentiful and off the shelf and cheap. So ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce the concept of the direct current supergrid, a modern high voltage electric transmission system, much more efficient because it is direct current. We can use the existing right-of-way for railroads and interstate highways. We bury the cable underground, so there's much less NIMBY, of course, not in my backyard, or banana. Do you know that one? Build absolutely nothing anywhere near anything. It's bananas. The grid would be protected from either solar flares or a nuclear EMP. On a big scale, as I mentioned, it's always sunny or windy somewhere. It would be a $2 trillion investment with an ROI of $10 to $15 trillion, making our nation safer, cleaner, a leader in a new energy economy, a model for the world. It's a win-win-win for the economy, for national security, and for the environment. Much of the transmission system would be underground. Right now, that bigger map is a map of oil and gas pipelines. There are 2.5 million miles of buried gas and oil pipelines across the country. Can you imagine the uproar we'd have if those pipes were sticking out in every single neighborhood? But they're not. What do you ever see when you drive along? You see a thing that says buried gas, or you see a little wellhead. If we had all those things above ground, people would have a fit because they'd say they're ugly, they leak, and they might blow up. But because they're underground, nobody pays any attention. An underground grid, the smaller map, would greatly lessen that visual impact. Can you see the electric transmission line? Yeah. Over here, can you see the gas pipeline? Look close. Okay, I'm going to look closer. I'll give you a hint right there. This is at the same spot on a ranch out in Southern California that we have visited. And I said to the owner of the ranch, "Where's the gas pipeline?" He said, "Oh, they buried that back here in the 1960s. I don't know." And so we looked and we looked and we finally could find it. But basically, out of sight, out of mind. So here's what the cable would look like. It would be about this big around. It would have different layers of sheathing and everything. The core would be copper or aluminum. You could bury it about 6 feet underground, or you could underwater it along rivers and coastlines. This is what it would stop. You may have heard about the Grain Belt Express. They spent 14 years trying to get that thing approved. It would take wind energy from Kansas all the way to the east, but taking it with above-ground transmission lines across Missouri and Illinois. And it would go across private property, and it was just in August it lost its federal funding. Senator Josh Hawley was instrumental in stopping that because his constituents didn't want to have those big, ugly transmission lines. 14 years they spent to try and get that in. A huge waste of money because it's above ground. If you put it below ground, it would be right beside all the buried oil and gas pipelines that run through that area. And railroads could be the key because railroads right now are losing their main source of revenue, which is hauling coal. Using their right-of-ways would create a new source of revenue for the railroads, And they could also power their trains with electricity instead of diesel fuel. This came out today. I just put this slide in before we came up here. The Sioux Green Line has just been approved. It is an underground transmission line, $3.2 billion, taking wind energy from Iowa to Chicago, buried along the Sioux Railroad right-of-way. It will be a groundbreaking underground transmission project, and it will power 1.5 million homes and add $3.2 billion to the local economy during construction. Underground advantages, national security. A massive solar flare, look up the Carrington event if you have not. It occurred in 1859. They saw northern lights in Jamaica. And there was such an induced current into the telegraph lines, the telegraph offices caught on fire. In today's society, it would mean our electricity would be off for many months. And an EMP from a nation that we've ticked off could do the same thing. Our lifestyle would go back 150 years, but few of us know how to live as pioneers. Virtually all commerce would shut down, banking, healthcare, food supply threatened. A shielded underground grid would secure us from the worst effects of either a massive solar flare or an EMP, and would shield us from the effects of severe weather, be it strong winds, hurricanes, winter storms, severe lightning. Undergrounding the grid gives us a huge advantage at protecting our electric supply. And Texas could be the example. Vast resources in Texas for gas, wind, and solar in the west, a great need of energy in the east where 90% of the population and businesses are. Despite being a red state, Texas is currently adding more wind and solar than any state, and they're expecting a huge increase in electricity from data centers, and they take pride in being an energy state. And the electricity is agnostic. It doesn't care how it is generated. And Texas is the only state that has all three of the grid interconnections within its boundary. And that gives us an opportunity to show that we could do this any place. It's a vulnerability for Texas because one major outage in a grid can't be supported very well by another, leaving millions at risk. Remember the big winter storm in Texas a few years ago, but it's also an opportunity because it's the perfect place to show an example of the grid eventually doing this all over the country. And without capacity growth, we will not meet the goal of being the world leader in energy and artificial intelligence. So here are our proposals. One would be from basically Lubbock to Temple, Texas. It would be along the Burlington, Northern Santa Fe right-of-way, and it would take buried cable all along that, about a $4 billion project that would connect all three grids. The other would be along the interstate highways from the Permian Basin up to Dallas, along Interstate 20. Again, about a $4 billion project connecting DC high voltage into the AC grid in Dallas and across eastern Texas. And this is kind of interesting. This also is very recent in PV Magazine. In Texas, they've tried to get a bill called Senate Bill 819, which basically is going to kill renewable energy, adding onerous requirements to new solar projects. The bill is expected to slow development, raise Texans' utility bills, and harm rural communities. Guess who's supporting it? Guess you can imagine, right? But look at this. This is kind of interesting. The rural people of Texas are saying to Austin, no way, you're not going to tell us what to do. And so they are saying ranchers and veterans and landowners and farmers, as one witness put it, don't want Austin to tell them what they can and can't do with their land. And in Armstrong County, where they have 2 wind farms that produce $100 million in revenue, and 90% of the people voted for Donald Trump, they're saying to Austin, no, we don't want that Bill 819. And the Texas Land Commissioner, Jerry Patterson, a Republican veteran and longtime advocate for gun rights, said bills like SB 819 will drive up prices for consumers and businesses. There's a grassroots effort in Texas for the people on the west side of the state saying, we're making good money out of this renewable energy. Don't mess with us. There have been two great American infrastructure projects in our history. In 1862, Lincoln, a Republican, signed the Transcontinental Railroad Act, and in 1956, Eisenhower, again a Republican, signed the Interstate Highway Act. Immensely expensive projects for their day. None of them bankrupted our country. All of them made our nation greater. The supergrid is our next great project, connecting energy sources across the country. Because on what we call a synoptic or a continental scale, it is always sunny or windy somewhere. And lower average cost of energy, the supergrid will save consumers money. And we do it as DC because at about 400 miles, in a study done for NOAA by Dr. Alexander Sandy McDonald, who's right up here in Boulder, longtime friend of mine, after about 400 miles, DC is more efficient and cheaper for long-distance transmission. AC is much better for regional and local distribution because, of course, you can step up the voltage and down as necessary. We propose 40,000 miles of high voltage direct current in the supergrid. The financial cost for HVDC is cheaper because direct current uses the whole wire instead of just the outside as in AC. And you can control the flow of the electricity. AC always flows downhill. With DC, we can move it much more simply and faster. It is the next great American project. Farmers and ranchers could not be mandated, but choose to grow electricity as a crop and save their farm. And agrivoltaics are also a big part of that. You can grow crops or raise sheep. The only thing they say is don't do goats, because the goats tend to jump on the solar panels and they like to eat the wires. Yeah, but the sheep love it. So, I want to give you an example of the impact of infrastructure because it's an expensive project, but it will bring back so much more money. This is the Antelope Valley north of Los Angeles, and because of the laws in California, they were mandated to lower their carbon emissions by 2035 and completely by 2045. And this was also signed by Republican Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. It's called AB 32, and it prompted the building of two transmission lines, the Tehachapi and the Barren Ridge, at a cost of $3.6 billion. But if you build it, they will come. In this area, inside that rectangle, that was all agricultural land back in 2008, and failing agricultural land because of climate change. It was too hot and dry to grow the almonds and pistachios anymore. So it was really just flat, hot, and dying up there. But when they put in the infrastructure, watch what happened. By this year, that is all solar fields. That is thousands and thousands of acres of solar fields. Over $60 billion. 3.6 to build the transmission line, $60 billion has been poured into there. And who are these investors? First Solar is owned by Warren Buffett. Okay. Yeah. Amazon, Google, Duke Energy, a coal company, is building renewables. EDF, which is the big French company that has all their nuclear reactors in France. And Masdar, which is Arabic for source, like the sun. Masdar is a company from the United Arab Emirates, a petrostate doing solar energy. And this is what it looks like. It's all above ground. So there's transmission lines and battery storage and huge utility scale solar fields because they had the power lines to get the product, electricity, to market. And this development is continuing out there. despite anything at the national level. This all started way before we had the bill during the Biden administration for the Inflation Reduction Act, and it will continue long after the big, better bill or whatever it's called right now, because it is needed. It is private money going in. They don't care what the government is saying about it. So let me show you the impact of infrastructure. That red star is a place that is called Big Bow Solar, and it is owned 50-50 from EDF and Masdar. That's what it looks like, and it's the first utility-scale solar field that also had battery storage. There's now mandates that they all have to be built with battery storage. So at $60 per megawatt hour, let's run some numbers. If you did that for a year, that's $525,000 when you do the multiplication. So we'll round it to $500,000. According to NREL, it takes about 5 acres of solar panels and inverters and fencing and everything else per megawatt. So if you take a 12-hour sun day, 8 hours of sunshine, 4 hours of battery storage, the numbers turn out that an acre of solar panels growing a crop of electricity, it's $50,000 per acre per year. So I asked ChatGPT about other crops I could grow, and I probably burned up a lot of electricity to ask it. And ChatGPT told me, well, soybeans and corn are worth about $1,000 an acre. An acre of almonds in California is $6,000, and an acre of oranges is $10,000. Not that you could grow any of that stuff on that dirt, because it's too hot and it's too dry. So lo and behold, electricity is a really profitable thing to grow. This is a map of Big Bow Solar. This is an assessor's parcel map. So every one of those little rectangles was a piece of land that somebody owned. This is not pristine desert. This has been farmed and mined and drilled and owned for 125 years. So it's all subdivided, and it looks like that. And if you look close, there is one Joshua tree above my head. This is not a forest of Joshua trees. Every one of those parcels had to be acquired one at a time, to where the consolidator for the solar field said, Mr. Nelson, I understand you own 10 acres of land out here. We'd like to talk to you about buying it or leasing it. So in this case, there is a 10-acre parcel of land that an investor bought for $2,000 an acre back in 2013, so a total of $20,000. They sold it to EDF and Masdar in 2020 for $160,000. If you want to know, that is a 700% return on investment in 7 years. Talk about a happy investor. And if you know of the rule of 72, at 4%, it would take you over 50 years to make that much money. So you can make marginal land actually very valuable with infrastructure. Another example, here's Big Bow right here. There are the two transmission lines, and here is 20 acres of land that is north of Big Bow Solar. And my friends, if you go out there, it looks like that. You better take sunscreen, a lot of water, and a snake bite kit, because this is bad land. But because of infrastructure, look what happened. That 20 acres was purchased by an investor in 2009 on the 30th of December, and they paid $750 an acre. So $14,500. And they probably went to a New Year's Eve party and told friends or family, hey, I just spent 15 grand on a bunch of desert land in California. And their relatives said, do you need some professional help? Why didn't you just light that on fire instead of buying that land? Well, here's why. Last year, they sold that 20 acres of land for $1 million. So $50,000 an acre. They bought that land for $14,500. They held it for 15 years. The tax laws in California, something called Prop 13, keep their taxes low and fixed. So they totaled their holding cost $2,500. So their entire investment was $17,000, and they made $1 million. Now you might say, wow, that's like winning the lottery. But it's not, because winning the lottery is luck. This was strategic and planned and long-range vision. And why is that land suddenly worth that much? Because at $60 per megawatt hour, that 20 acres alone will produce $1 million worth of electricity from now until the sun burns out. Marginal land becoming very valuable. Full disclosure, my wife and I do this type of investing, and we show others how to do it as well. If you are interested in learning more, grab that QR code. I'll leave it up there for just a second. We can explain how we can place you in front of all of this solar investment. It's pretty interesting stuff. But let me talk about this in another way. You know about brownfields. Brownfields are previously developed land areas. They are old landfills, closed industrial sites, abandoned mining projects. There are estimates of 450,000 brownfield sites around the country. They are a local eyesore, but these are Superfund sites. They're expensive to remove. Turning these sites into solar fields could be an excellent solution. Converting even a small number of them could create a lot of electricity and transform blighted areas into a valuable resource, turning brownfields into what we call bright fields. Estimates are there are 5 million acres of brownfield in the United States. Converting just 1 million of those acres into solar would generate 200 gigawatts, 200 nuclear reactors worth of electricity every single year, and generate, depending on local electric costs, $25 to $50 billion a year in revenue. And if we have the transmission system, the supergrid, to move it around, we can utilize these sites. And that will make marginal land valuable and productive. We can solve our growing power needs and generate a great deal of wealth. And how about highways? Look up therey.org. And the REI is a project, a pilot project along I-85 in southwest Georgia, where they are using the medians on the highways, the areas around the on and off ramps and the clover leaves, to put in solar power. And they have actually developed advanced GIS mapping software, and they can show the best locations to put solar in along highways anywhere in the country. And you think about it, what's the one pushback they always say on electric cars? Well, you're not paying the gas tax, so you're not helping keep our roads up. If we were generating electricity along the highways, we'd create a tremendous amount of revenue to help pay for better roads. So, if you want to learn more, there's my QR code for our group. Dr. Alexander McDonald is the brains behind the whole thing. He has done this extensive report on. He's one of the smartest people I've ever met. And then Chip Cummings is the head of the American Renewable Energy Institute. We meet every Thursday online and do a Zoom meeting. If it's something that you would be interested in attending, we need to do it by invitation. So write to me, and I can then write on to Chip, or you can send it directly to Chip if you'd like and say you were here tonight, and join our group to talk more about what we're doing in terms of promoting the supergrid. Everybody knows somebody. Everybody might have a connection that we don't have, and we think if we can get this in front of our current administration, our Congress, our Senate, we might make some headway on this, because it really should not be a partisan issue. We all know we need more electricity. We all know that we have a climate crisis that we're facing, but we can decarbonize the grid later. Build the supergrid now with wind and solar and battery storage and gas turbine backup. We can power our nation. We can decarbonize the gas at a time that's just more advantageous. But if we don't have the grid first, we can't get any of this stuff done. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Hey, Martin.
Okay. Well, thank you very much indeed. We have time for questions, about 20 minutes in total. So I'll walk the microphone around so that our online audience can also hear. Yep. I see a question all the way in the back.
Yeah, and by the way, Martin, This is my little book on climate. Cindy's walking around with some copies. It is free, and it's 10 facts in 10 minutes about carbon dioxide and what it does as far as heating up the planet. Our goal was not to write the thickest book on climate change, because I'll leave that to Michael Mann, but we wanted to write one that people would maybe pick up and read if they were not quite sure about all this. And if you have the copy of it and you are reading it, and somebody says, what's that? They can use the QR code on the back to download a free electronic version of the book.
And since you mentioned Michael Mann, 2 weeks ago he came out with a new book that he co-wrote with Peter Hotez.
I'm reading it right now.
It is called Science Under Siege. And if you have low blood pressure, this will fix it for you.
Yeah, how would the electricity be used for the train is one question. The other question is, you said the only limiting barrier to solar would be the land area, but what about the mining? So I have two questions that are unrelated. I was just wondering about the mining for the solar.
Estimates are, and this is according to Bill McKibben's new book, that by the year 2050, we will not need to ever mine anything more as far as batteries or solar panels, because we'll be able to completely recycle all of the materials for all of the solar that we would ever need moving into the future, because the panels will only get more efficient and we can completely close the loop to recycle everything. So unfortunately, our entire current energy system involves a lot of digging stuff up. I mean, when you burn a lump of coal, you have to dig up another lump of coal. When you put solar panels out there, they run for 30 years, and then you recycle them and make new, more efficient solar panels. So actually, that is a situation that will gradually solve itself. As far as the powering of the railroads, that would be with the above-ground cantilever things that we use, like on the train that goes out to DIA. And again, I'm not an engineer or an electrical engineer, so I don't know exactly how they designed that, but to me that sounds like a technical problem, and technical problems are solvable. Grab that one.
About a year ago, we had a presentation from two people from RMI, Rocky Mountain Institute, on exactly that study that you referenced in Bill McKibben's book on battery circularity. So take a look either at the study directly, which can be found at rmi.org, or on our YouTube site. So a couple more questions.
Very interesting talk.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I would like to know which company or group of companies was responsible for this undergrounded HVDC line from Iowa to Chicago, and was there federal or state funding for it, or was it all private?
It was combination of public-private money. Just do a search, because I just did it today on Sioux Green Line. I know there was a Scandinavian company that was involved in the project, and the way that they did it is they didn't go into these farming communities and say, we want your land. If we don't get your land, eminent domain is going to get your land. They went in and they went to all little town hall meetings in Iowa and said, here's what we'd like to do. We'd like to bury this cable along the Sioux Railroad right-of-way, and that will go through your land. While we're there, we're going to have a lot of big earth-moving equipment for a day or two. Is there anything on your farm that we could help you with? Do you need to have your dam for your water pond fixed up? Would you like us to make an access road for you? Because we'll have all the trucks out there. And the farmers coming up after the meeting are like, put it on my land. I want it. That sounds great. Go ahead and do it. So it was an example of how, if you go in there, not with a hammer, but go in there with a handout and say, hey, how can we help you? When it's done, you won't even see it. They actually had very good buy-in on the whole project. Now, it's just announced today that it was approved, and so we'll see how it all plays out in the coming years. But that was sort of the gentle way that they went in to get this approved by the landowners. Unlike what they did with the Grain Belt Express above-ground transmission line, when these farmers were told, basically, if you don't like it, tough. Now, that works in China, because in China, if a farmer says, well, I don't want those transmission lines over my land, do you think that the Chinese government really cares? They say, no, we're going to put them there, and then we're going to flood your land because we're going to go build a dam behind it. So, I mean, it's a different story there. So look up Sue Greenline. There's a lot of stuff. I just put those slides together at 3 o'clock this afternoon. Yeah. Hi.
Hi, great information, Mike. I've been doing this work for almost 30 years as far as land business, working for utilities and whatnot, putting infrastructure in. You didn't mention the cost differential between the undergrounding versus overhead transmission. The arguments I've always fought against is undergrounding is multiple times more expensive than overhead, and the ratepayers are the ones who have to pay for that.
Right.
Could you talk about that, please?
Yeah. I think what we just saw with the Grain Belt Express, where they spent 14 years and a lot of money, and then the whole project gets canceled. What does that do as far as the ratepayers? And then they don't have the electricity in the first place with the demand going up, so their rates are going up. As we built in this country last year 300 miles of above-ground transmission. China built thousands and thousands of miles of transmission line. And, there they don't care if it's above ground or underground because the government works differently. But I think the difference is, yes, it's probably 3 times more expensive to underground it, 10 times more expensive, depending on the kind of ground I guess you're going through. But it's what do you tie up in litigation and delays? And that's a very good question. Not all of this will necessarily be underground. There's a lot of great work being done in reconductoring existing transmission lines. In other words, instead of a steel transmission line, use carbon fiber, and that way the line is much lighter, and you can change the makeup of the aluminum, called anodizing it, and so it can flow more electricity. So it's much lighter and can put way more electricity through it. So you can go back and reconductor existing above ground transmission. It will be an expensive project, but doing the super grid and undergrounding it like we've done with all these gas and oil pipelines is, I think, the key to getting it done in a much more timely manner. But I know exactly what you're saying there. Yep. Thank you for that input. Absolutely. The comment was made about fire liability and above ground. And just, the effects of, do you know what galloping conductors are? I think this is really cool. I used to forecast loads for utilities. When we have you ever see when you're driving down the highway and it's like freezing fog and those antennas on the trucks are doing this back and forth? Well, what happens if you get a wet snow or a freezing rain, it makes a little wing shape on the transmission lines. And those transmission lines start to do this. And when they get like this, they short out. And that term within the utility, the transmission industry, is galloping conductors. And it causes a lot of wintertime power outages. That would be another thing that we would solve that potential problem in many areas that get strong winter storms.
Mike, thank you for your presentation. I have a question about maintenance for solar fields. And you said the panels themselves can last 30 years, but I know by the Arvada water treatment plants, they've installed a solar field. And when I was out there several years ago, the operators were not exactly happy with the level of maintenance needed for that. So thinking about solar fields along a highway median for miles and miles, I'm just curious about the maintenance needs for the solar panels and the system itself.
If a truck throws a rock, it breaks your windshield. Does it spin a rock onto the solar panels? There's been a fair amount of pushback when they show that one solar field in West Texas that got wiped out by a hailstorm. And it's kind of like the naysayers on solar say, see? And to me, that's like, well, every year, some poor farmer on the Northeast Plains has his entire crop wiped out by hail. And what does that farmer do the next year? He plants another crop. And so if there's damage to the solar fields, be it from weather or something else, you fix it and the solar field goes back online. Much of the infrastructure stays right there. And in some areas, certainly in the desert Southwest, the area I showed you in California, they don't get any of those type of storms. So California just signed a brand new law that they are going to be an exporter of electricity. They used to bring a lot of electricity in from wind farms in Wyoming and from a big coal-fired plant in Utah. And they don't need that anymore. Actually, they make enough electricity that they can now, with the proper transmission, sell their electricity to Phoenix and Las Vegas and other states. And so if we had the grid, we can make many parts of the country available for selling electricity at the cheapest rate. And it would winterize us, if you will, from bad winter storms, from hurricanes, because if you have this big interconnected high voltage direct current grid, you can quickly move electricity from source to need. So it's great backup.
Right, they also have insurance
Yeah,
to fix those things as well, so
Right.
that's another piece of that puzzle.
now, hopefully we'll still have insurance. Yes,
Excellent presentation.
thank you.
One of the things that's not mentioned here is the width of the right-of-way. To build the big, as we used to call them as a kid growing up, the giants on the prairies, your right-of-way width is 4 to 5 times as wide as a DC grid layout. The railroads is easy. The key is the endpoints of the DC. Where are they going to locate, or how are they going to choose where the endpoints of that transmission line go?
Where we'd have the inverters? Yeah. In the case of the Texas one along the Burlington, northern Santa Fe, we'd have 3 different inverter stations roughly about 100 miles apart. And this is expensive infrastructure for those things, no doubt about it. Yeah. Thank you. Yep.
Do you anticipate needing a national centralized grid operator on this system when it's built, or does the management get kind of handled regionally like today, or do you need to centralize the control?
I would think it would be a combination of distributed control centers, partly just from a standpoint of you don't want to have all of your eggs in one basket. But right now we have such a disconnect between the eastern and the western and the Texas grids that it's very difficult to move electricity all across the country. And this would make that much simpler. As to how you'd exactly plan that and build it out, I can't tell you, but I think that would be part of the study that you do to how the best way is to organize the grid and to run it. Yeah, I would think it'd be more distributed than one central location.
I have a question about, do you know who owns the land on either side of I-76 between I-25 and Nebraska? Do you have any idea? There's wide open space up there.
I don't know who owns it, except I think the right of way is all part of the Interstate Highway Project.
Yes.
And with the railroads, they got those right of way when Abraham Lincoln signed the bill. And so they have massive amounts of right of way that we could use. Yeah.
Well, there is land, wide open land.
Yep.
on
Yep.
either
And you know
side
what?
up there.
Putting an underground transmission there would be way more acceptable to the people that live up there than stringing those great big cables above the, 100 feet in the air.
You've been giving this talk for a few months at least, maybe a little bit longer.
Can you tell?
I'm wondering how often, what's the most encouraging response you've received? And of course, you want to get some traction at some high levels. I'm wondering what the most encouraging thing you've heard.
Generally, when I speak to groups that are far smarter about electricity than I am, I don't get a lot of pushback saying, well, we can't do this. Generally, it's like, this is just a technical issue to solve. And if we have the leadership nationally to get it done, I mean, you think about it, when Kennedy said, I say we go to the moon, we got there in a decade. And, we won World War II in 5 years. We could do this project if we made it a top priority nationally to say, if we're going to compete globally with artificial intelligence and electrifying everything in the next 25 years, we can't do it with the type of grid that we have right now. It has to be something much more modern. And I would say with the current administration, if right now fossil fuel is your vibe, yeah, we're going to need that, but we're not going to get there And if we try and get there just with that, and I know that currently they won't want to hear that, we will fry the planet. I mean, we're going to put so much carbon in the atmosphere that our grandchildren and their heirs are going to say, what were you guys thinking? But we can do this now. We don't need new technology. Everything we need, we already know how to do with wind and solar and battery storage and gas turbine backup. We don't need to wait to invent nuclear fusion here on Earth because, as I said, it's 8 minutes away and it's going to burn for 5 billion years. We just have to capture it. One more here.
I love what I'm learning and I know next to nothing, but I keep thinking this is a way better place to put my money than the stock market at present.
Well, you know, as far as land, I mean, the old adage is from Mark Twain, you know, buy land, they're not making it anymore. And so, I mean, we know all of the things that have, think of all the things that used to be like a given, like a newspaper or a magazine or taking your film to the photomat or going to the VHS store to rent a movie. All those things that we thought, and you know, yeah, I always do this with the kids. When I was talking to the schools, I would challenge them and say, you know, we hold a supercomputer in our hand now that used to fill a room 25 years ago. Who knows what amazing things are going to happen in the next 25 years? And then I always would say to the kids, and you know who's going to invent those amazing things? Boys and girls, it's you guys. You are the future that's going to change everything in this world. And that is so true. And it gives, I still have hope. And if you really are feeling a little blue, get Bill McKibben's new book, Here Comes the Sun, because it really does say we have, for the first time since the environmental movement started, the answer right in front of us, and that is low-cost renewable energy.
And actually, we had a Bill McKibben event right here in this very room on Sunday. And on Tuesday, I went out to record Bill McKibben in Boulder. So this is going to end up also on our YouTube channel. It'll save you the cost of the book. But I would suggest you buy it anyway.
I was on a airline flight down to Huntsville, Alabama for the National Weather Association meeting a couple weeks ago, and I'm reading McKibben's book. And lo and behold, I look over and the lady next to me is also reading a book. And I looked around and everybody else is staring at their phone. So I just tapped her on the shoulder. I said, how often do you think this ever happens? That like two people are actually reading a book, a physical book? Yeah. They were, but I mean, and they probably were, but I just thought two people actually doing this, it was like, you never, how have you ever go and see somebody reading a newspaper while they're waiting to get on a flight? It never happens anymore. Yes?
Yeah, great presentation. Thank you very much. Another little factoid is in 2007, they started buying right-of-way for the Trans-West Express, 2007. It might be completed next year or the year after.
Yeah,
the other little factoid, over 40 years ago, I worked for an engineering company in around Omaha, and my boss went to the Union Pacific Railroad because they were really reluctant to lay the fiber along the railroad across Wyoming and so on, and the comment was he showed them the money, what it would take. So then the engineering company went ahead and did the geotechnical work for that line across there. So thank you again.
Thank you. And you know, railroads, as you said, they have put all their fiber optic to run their train control systems all underground along the right-of-way. And a friend of mine is in the rail, he works for Burlington Northern Santa Fe. He said, we're really good at undergrounding stuff. We've been doing it for decades. And so we can do it along those areas.
Well, I think this is a very good way to end this presentation for tonight. Let me just remind you, the series is always on the fourth Thursday of the month, except, you guessed it, November. Yeah. So come back again in 4 weeks or for our vaccination event on October 2nd. And my next charge to the audience is now to go out to the store and take a left. That's where we have the food and drink. Have more conversations. Ask somebody who knows, like they might know the answer. You'll find out soon enough. And thanks again to Mike and his wife,
pleasure.
Cindy.
Thank you so much for your interest. Thank you.